Hey guys, Mr. Bowman here. Today's learning objective is in white and we are learning to multiply and divide integers. So in our last video we described what an integer was, and an integer is a whole number that's not a decimal or not a fraction, and it can be positive or negative. In that video we learned how to add and subtract integers. Today we're going to focus on how to multiply and divide integers. So before we start getting into some questions, let's run through a little exercise that helps us develop the rules. So I'm just going to start off with a simple question. 2 times 3, that comes to 6. 2 times 2, that comes to 4. 2 times 1, that comes to 2. So hopefully we can see that we are reducing the times by number to identify what's happening. And we're then eventually going to get to 2 times 0. That is equal to 0. Let's carry on. After 0 would be negative 1. So 2 times negative 1, that comes to negative 1. 2 times negative 2, that comes to negative 4. And we'll stop at negative 3, that comes to negative 6. And there are some interesting patterns that we can get from here. So this top square, that is timesing a positive number by another positive number. And the answer was always positive. We're going to ignore the 0 because that always comes to 0. And if we look at the bottom one, we are always multiplying a positive number with a negative number. And you'll see the answer always comes out negative. So from that little exercise, we figured out a positive number times a positive number. That is going to be equal to positive. And we've also figured out a positive number times a negative number. That answer is going to be negative. And we can use these rules to help us with our multiplication and our division. So let's change pen colors. Let's go for green. Let's try again. So instead of doing positive 2 all the time, let's try negative 2. So negative 2 times 3, that comes to negative 6. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to reduce that times by number by 1 every time. So negative 2, that stayed the same, times 2, that comes to negative 4. Negative 2 times 1, that comes to negative 2. And in the middle, we can do negative 2 times 0 equals 0. And if we've done that, we can actually observe a pattern. So every time 2 is actually being added. So if we continue that logic, negative 2 times negative 1, that actually comes to 2 because we're going to go plus 2. Then we've got negative 2 times negative 2, that comes to 4 because again we're adding 2. And we've got negative 2 times negative 3, that comes to 6, and that's because we're adding 2. So by recognizing and observing the patterns, we can figure out all the different combinations of our multiplication. So let's have a look. This top one here, that was always a positive number times a negative number. And again, we've learned that is negative. And if you compare that with our first result of drawing a little arrow, those two are actually the same thing. So whenever the signs, one's positive, one's negative, we're going to have a negative answer. And down the bottom, we've observed a negative number times a negative number, negative times a negative. That is always equal to a positive. So we can utilize these rules to help us with our multiplying and dividing of integers. So let's change the pen color again. Let's do some yellow. Let's just do a few quick questions. So question 1, negative 4 times 2. So that is an example where we have 1 negative, 1 positive. And we've learnt down the bottom there that that will always have a negative answer. So we know it's going to be negative. We then do the multiplication, 4 times 2. That gets us to 8. So let's have a look at another one. Let's have a look at negative 3 times negative 6. So which rule are we thinking about applying? Let's have a look down the bottom. We've got 4 rules. I'm liking that one down the bottom. A negative times a negative equals positive. So that means our answer is going to be positive, we'll just scribble that out, positive 18. So negative times negative, that means it's going to be positive. And 6 times 3, that means it's going to be 18. And let's have another look at one more example for multiplication. 4 times negative 5. Let's look at the numbers. We've got a positive and a negative. So we're doing a positive times a negative. So we know our answer is going to be negative. We're then going to do 4 times 5, and that gets us to 20. So that's really cool. All right, and just draw a line there. And what we've learned, so we focus on multiplication, but these rules are also going to apply when we're dividing. So let's do negative 8 divided by 2. We've got one negative and one positive, so our answer is going to be negative. And 8 divided by 2, that comes to 4. So our answer would be negative 4. Let's have a look at another one. We've got negative 20 divided by negative 4. So we have two negative numbers, so we know our answer is going to be positive. And we've got 20 divided by 4, and that comes to 5. So our answer would be 5. And let's have a look at one more example. Let's do 30 divided by negative 5. So again, let's inspect our numbers. We've got positive 30 and negative 5. So we've got one positive, one negative. So we know our answer is going to be negative. And we've got 30 divided by 5. That comes to 6. So our answer would be negative 6. And that's 3 multiplication and 3 division questions. What I'm quickly going to do is I'm just going to rub out some of the work that we've been looking at before, just to summarize kind of the multiplication and the division rules that we need to be aware of for our multiplication and division work. So our starting point, we have to look at the two numbers that are being divided or multiplied together. If you have a positive times or divided by another positive, that answer is going to be positive. If you have a positive times a negative, that is going to be a negative. Don't forget that could also be divided by. If you have a positive, if you have a negative times a positive, that answer is going to be negative. And finally, if you have a negative times another negative, that answer is going to be positive. So remembering these rules are really important with our multiplication. Another way or another shortcut to remember, if the signs are different, so here the signs are different and here the signs are different, your answer will be negative. And if the signs are the same, negative and a negative or positive and a positive, you'll have a positive answer. Hopefully you found this video useful. Now let's get into some questions.